This is the Four Corners Podcast.
Elton ready on his second attempt. That one is no good. They battle for it. Loose ball. Recovered Marvin. He scores. 17 seconds left. And he was fouled.
Here we go. Lawson with a runner. No. The rebound. Hansbrough at the gun. Got it.
They were 4 for 24.
Hansbrough on a switch on Paulus. A deep three. And Green rips down the rebound in traffic. 4 on 1.
What a great job. What a terrific job in transition. I mean, you couldn't plan that any better as a coach.
Tipped away by Johnson. It's loose. Page. Johnson.
They're dancing in the aisles. They're high-fiving. They're celebrating. They're going bananas on Franklin Street.
Pass to Britt, 15 seconds to play. Up high to Page, gets a screen from Meeks. Page driving in on the left, high off the glass for two. Louisville with 7 seconds. Jones has it, goes left corner, Black's here for 3. Back iron, 1 second to play. Stick up, no! Carolina wins it! The Tar Heels win it! 72-71. 6 seconds to go. Pinson comes front court. Pinson to May for the win. Got it! Luke May! He got it! 0.3 of a second! Luke May gives Carolina the 75-73 lead.
Are you kidding me?
Inside 30 overall. Love. Top of the key. Oh! Big time delivery.
Here are your hosts, Josh Marlowe and Anthony Pagnotta.
Hello and welcome into another edition of the Four Corners Podcast. We are powered by Carolina Electrical Services. We are joined today by Shelby Swanson. She covers Carolina basketball. She covers Carolina athletics for the News and Observer. One of my favorite writers on the beat covering the Tar Heels, and we're excited to have her with us today. We're going to have some fun talking Carolina basketball over the next 15 to 20 minutes. Shelby, I want to first thank you for making some time to come on and talk with us, and I hope you're having a good day so far.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks so much for having me.
You've been on the list of guests I've been wanting to get on. I think, first off, I'm a big fan of your questions. As someone that critiques press conference questions, I think you're not afraid to ask Hubert Davis the tough ones, and I think you're pretty fair in your writing, which I can really appreciate that as well. The first thing I want to ask you is just in your words, you're a writer. How would you assess Carolina's season so far? They're 16-4. They're 4-3 in the ACC. They're 4-4 in Quad 1. They're ranked number 16 in the AP poll. How would you assess the first 20 games of the season so far for Carolina basketball?
I would say some downs, a lot of ups, honestly. I think this is a team that's kind of hitting its stride. You know, I was on that West Coast swing where they dropped the 2 games, obviously, to Stanford and Cal, and I think it was a bit of a wake-up call. I think the SMU game, obviously, you know, you can kind of write that off maybe as just Boobie Miller, you know, opposing guard having a hot night, but then you see kind of a close game against Wake Forest, obviously the West Coast swing. I think that's really resets the group in a way, and you saw it with just the fight that they had, obviously coming back from 16 points at Virginia, and that's a game that, you know, Seth Trimble's kind of spoken about with us, and then also if you look at his comments on Field of 68 as well, that was a game where they came in at halftime and they said, you know, we've been doing a lot of talk about pride and fighting and how we're tough, and he would assess that first half as, you know, they were playing soft. They were kind of talking the talk, not walking the walk. And I think just the overall kind of depth that you saw too, that's allowed for that comeback. Luka Bogovac, Derek Dixon hitting some timely shots, obviously 17 second half points for Jaren Stevenson, Caleb Wilson doing his thing. They get the ball in his hands late, which I was really in favor of, because there's some times where you saw, like, for instance, in that West Coast swing. Just some awkward kind of late game, shot making. But love that they had the timeout. They drew it up for Caleb. And another thing that I think was really notable about that game in particular is that they were able to, again, pull off a win like that on the road against a team of Virginia's caliber, one of the best teams in the ACC. Really, really tough crew without Henry performing like he has. And I really think that, I mean, if you look at, who's the star on this team, who's the engine, obviously it's Caleb. But if you kind of go into some of the advanced analytics, Henry Vasar is arguably, I would say, the most valuable player, the most irreplaceable player, and he was limited to foul trouble, really struggling down low. And Jaron Stevenson stepped up and was that guy. I think there's still some questions in terms of what does somebody like Akai Evans become, and how heavy can they lean into really Derek Dixon as the point guard, because Hubert's been somebody that's been a little bit reluctant to kind of just outright name, all right, this guy's our point guard. He wants multiple ball handlers and everybody to kind of play this positionless style. But I think coming into the season, you looked at this roster and you looked at the makeup, and the pieces looked a lot better than last year from a roster construction standpoint. They were tested early, had a bit of a dip. You look at Duke again. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to talk about Duke on a UNC podcast, but they also went through kind of a rough stretch in ACC play where they're still stacking wins and ranked wins at that, but the defensive performances slipped. They've rebounded. UNC has since rebounded, and I think we're gearing up for a really, really exciting UNC Duke game next weekend. I know I'm excited for it, but anyways, long answer. I would say some downs, some question marks, obviously, with those recent losses, but a lot of ups, particularly in the way that they were able to respond, I think, at Virginia. I mean, I think that was really a season-shifting win in terms of just the conversations that we're having about this team and the perspective, not only of them, but of Hubert Davis and the coaching job that he's doing.
Yeah, I know when it was down 16, I know what the conversation was going to be, which was going to be the same conversation we had after Stanford in California, which was they probably need to fire the guy that's wearing the suit on the sidelines. I don't want to have those conversations. I want this team to win and play to their potential. I want to go back to the West Coast trip really quickly, because I believe it was a tweet that you sent out in the Cal game where there was a huddle where at one point it became the Caleb Wilson huddle, where he was looking at his teammates and it was him doing the yelling, him doing the barking, the challenging, and it wasn't Hubert Davis. And we live in this day and time where coaches tell you, hey, we need to be a player-led team. We don't need to be a coach-led team. The best teams are player-led. That was something Mack Brown said a lot when he was Carolina's football coach. Right. And I think Hubert Davis is kind of starting to echo that as well. And it felt like to me with when Carolina came back and they played the way they played against Notre Dame, and then they had the comeback against Virginia, it felt like Carolina found its voice. And they found their voice not in senior Seth Trimble, not in a veteran guy like Henry Vasar who's been around, but in their best player, Caleb Wilson. Do you get that sense as well, that he has emerged not as Carolina's only their best player, but as their vocal and emotional leader?
100%. I would definitely encourage folks to read my follow story after, I think it was after the Notre Dame game. That's basically what I wrote about, was Caleb Wilson finding his voice. And it's something that he's been very intentional about, spent a lot of days in Hubert Davis's office, particularly after the West Coast swing. And they talked about that. They talked about how, in Coach Davis's years, the kind of leadership role was almost just automatically bestowed upon you when you became a senior. Obviously, we live in a different era where increasingly guys are not going to be around multiple years, either for they're going to the league or they're, flip-flopping, between schools, things like that. Caleb Wilson's been very vocal about just kind of stating the obvious. Hey, I'm only here for a year. I'm going to give you, what I can. I think, and not to psychoanalyze or anything, I feel like he's maybe been a little bit, or maybe was a little bit reluctant, at least initially, to kind of be that voice in the locker room, in the huddles, on the courts. I would assume just because he's a freshman, you know? But recently, that's something that he said that he really, really wanted to improve upon. It was interesting. We didn't get the chance to talk to him after the Cal game, but when I got the chance to talk to him after the Notre Dame game, so it's the first time, getting to chat with him after that, the end of the West Coast swing. And I asked him, all right, long flight back from California, or actually it might have been my colleague, Rod Baxley, who works over the Fayetteville Observer, but we were both kind of asking him about this. Asked him, okay, long flight back from California, what are you thinking about? The first thing he said, it wasn't about, this aspect of my game or my free throw, whatever. He said, I want to be more of a leader. I want to be more vocal. That's what he was thinking about. And I think you saw flashes of it with that kind of huddle and talking to him, talking to Seth Trimble. It wasn't anything negative. Obviously, sometimes clips and things can be taken out of context. You can see guys getting on each other, yelling at each other. And, if it's a loss, they have culture issues.
Yeah.
That's not the case. This is just the case of a guy that's trying to fire up his teammates. And Seth said, we like that and we want more of it. And basically what Caleb said he was saying in that huddle was, look, I'm giving my everything. I'm giving my all. And we're North Carolina. We should not be losing to Cal. And just kind of talking about that pride there. So yeah, I would say 100% he stepped up a lot. It's interesting. I hadn't heard this until I was just listening back to Seth Trimble's interview with the Field of 68 guys today. But he said the halftime at UVA, James Brown was the loudest. A lot of guys were talking, but he said James Brown was the loudest and they're getting on guys. But I know talking to Seth after the UVA win, just asking him, have you noticed maybe more guys talking, more guys getting comfortable using their voice in huddles in the locker room, etc.? And he said yes. And you saw a lot of examples of it. I loved when there's a stretch in that game where you saw even Derek Dixon, who, just recently kind of cracked the starting lineup, right? And he's a freshman. He was getting on Caleb and Henry to box out, so you're seeing a lot of voices from a lot of different guys. And that's something that this team really, really needs, because if you think back to last season, RJ Davis's senior year, they didn't really have that. They really didn't have that. And I think that's something that they were lacking. You can't quite have Seth, taking over and being that guy, because it's not his team. It's RJ's team. Yeah. And sometimes some guys, personality wise, they're not going to be the aggressors and getting on their teammates. It just doesn't fit their personality. That's something that Hubert has talked about. I think this has a personality and a group of guys that really reminds me of that year that the team went to the Sweet 16 in LA with Cormac and Harrison, those guys, because you heard a lot of the same things from players and coaches about just the level of chatter collectively from everybody in huddles, timeouts, things like that. I see a lot of those same characteristics in this group, which sometimes, honestly, the personality and the motor, I think, can be as important, if not more important, than the individual skill sets. If you don't have the right, mentality, guys calling each other out, doesn't matter, how good you are if you're not going about it the right way. So long answer, but I would say for sure, just all around, they've been way more vocal, and it's going to continue to be important as they get into some of these more competitive ACC games. Because, the ACC is deep. It is really competitive this year. And so they're going to need to continue to talk, because there's going to be a lot of rough stretches where they're going to get punched in games and they need to punch back.
I think 8 of their final 11 are quad 1, quad 2 games. So a chance for them to really build a legitimate tournament resume and get a high seed come Selection Sunday. I want to ask about Seth Trimble, because he waited for this moment. He waited to be the guy, if you will, after having to share the backcourt and the limelight with a guy like RJ Davis. He gets injured after the win over Kansas, misses 42 days, I think is how long he was out. But during that time, and Carolina emerged as a really good defensive team. Part of it was the competition, but those numbers were what the numbers were, and Carolina was statistically elite. And he was, in our mind, the best perimeter defender. We thought when he came back, that was going to elevate Carolina to another level and maybe emerge as a national title contender. That hasn't been the case. They have taken a drastic drop defensively. I think they were 54th this morning in KenPom in defensive rating. Is that a coincidence? Is that something that we just really can't explain? Because I think, between him and Jaren Stevenson, they're the two most versatile defenders on the roster. But we all thought when Trimble came back, it would only elevate Carolina's defense, but the numbers would tell a different story.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is it's communication and timing is what I would say, because you have to think about and this is I've had conversations with folks about this. I think this is an interesting point. The defensive habits that you pick up playing in different systems and in different programs. And I think something that's really I think Brad Brownell on the ACC Coaches Call the other day had some interesting points about this. I'll have to go back and find it now. That just kind of jogged my memory. But when guys come into your system, and again, you have a hodgepodge of guys from all these different schools transferring in, the defensive habits that fit your system that you have to build and the old defensive habits that you have to break. I think that's something that folks don't talk about enough in today's college basketball era. I mean, that takes a lot of coaching and practice. And so sometimes when you see, missed assignments or miscommunications, certain things on switches and things like that, it can be, a case of those old defensive habits popping up. So I'll say that. I'll also say that, coming back into, the lineup, I mean, think about how many, games that Seth had played with this team before he went out. He didn't have that much game experience with this squad, and you're coming back in. You're still kind of learning the group and how you communicate and in game action. How am I working with Henry on this hedge or whatnot, what have you. I will say that too, a lot of, and I think if Oglesby does some stuff with like ESPN ACC Network analyst, he had a really, really interesting breakdown in the West Coast swing, talking about how a lot of the defensive issues that they were facing, and specifically on ball screen actions and things like that, it was errors actually in the front court. We talk about how talented, this group of or this duo rather, Caleb Wilson and Henry Vasa are, and they are that. But a lot of the issues that you were seeing was Caleb talked some about this after the West Coast swing. Maybe he missed a tag on a big man, or they're getting drawn out too far. Anyways, I really encourage people to go and check out his film breakdown. And so a lot of that, maybe it allows a guard to snake into the lane and things like that. And you see folks talking about, well, why can't our guards, quote unquote, guard the opposing team's guard? It's a little bit more complicated than that. I will say and again, this sounds like I'm going on some sort of long tangents, defending Seth. He's had his defensive faults and mistakes too. I'm not saying that he is completely innocent here, right? Yeah. But I'm just kind of providing a different perspective, if you will. I think another thing to consider is just how much film and how much tape opposing teams have, and they can scout Carolina. Talking to the SMU coach after that game, he said that, we were really trying to attack their switches, force them to make mistakes there. Talking to the players after I think it was the Cal game, they wanted a lot of ball movement on the perimeter. They were trying to attack some of the slow switches. So in a lot of those early ACC losses, kind of talking to opposing players, opposing coaches about the way that they were, scouting UNC, they kind of picked up on some of those mistakes the Tar Heels were tending to make on the defensive end. So I think it's a combination of things. You have somebody coming back into a rotation, trying to get comfortable there, some just general communication mistakes around the board, and also bad habits getting exposed when teams come in with a lot more tape, and also just elite guard play once you get into the ACC as opposed to some of these opponents that they were facing. I mean, there is elite guard play in the ACC, and so it's great that UNC has this positional size, this length at various positions. That's something they're intentional about in their roster building. I think you're going to see a big difference of that when they're going to be a lot more competitive against a squad like Duke. But also, when you face somebody like a Boopy Miller, some of these just really talented guards, Ibuka Okore, sometimes that positional size against these really tiny and shifty and fast guards, it can be a little bit of a challenge. I mean, Jaren Stevenson struggled against that a little bit on the West Coast, and he's a fantastic defender. So it's a lot of things. And I think too, when again, going back to the communication and the kind of player-led thing, right? Guys got to talk. Guys got to take pride in their own assignments. And I think that's something that they realized, and you're going to start to see some improvements. I could be wrong, but I think that certainly the last two games really a turning point for them.
Yeah, I hope so. I think part of the frustration too for Carolina fans were there was another team that was out west that played the same two teams that Carolina played. And let's just say that Cal and Stanford did not have the offensive output against Duke that they had against Carolina. Not that I want to compare myself to them, but that's just kind of the nature of the beast where, you give up 54 in the first half to Cal. Cal scored 56 the entire game against Duke. You have 95 given up to Stanford, and they only score 50 against Duke. Carolina fans are going to look at that and say, hey, what's the issue there? We got to get that corrected. We're talking with Shelby Swanson. She does a great job covering Carolina for the News and Observer. A few more for you, Shelby, and I'll let you go. The point guard spot, been the biggest talking point, you could really say, since Kentucky, when Derek Dixon kind of showed up, in a big way. Got Carolina a win there in the final seconds. And then, that was when the discussion started about, hey, when can we start to maybe see him be moved into the starting lineup? It took Hubert Davis a lot longer to make that switch, but he started 3 games. He scored in double figures in all 3 of those starts. I still believe in Kyan Evans because they need his shooting if they want to go deep into the NCAA tournament. And I think Hubert Davis is aware of that as well. What do you make of the point guard spot? And with the week off, we know Hubert has a desire to play with 2 guards on the floor. Could we start to see some lineups that feature Kyan Evans more off the ball, where he's just catching and shooting as opposed to trying to get Carolina organized on both ends of the floor?
Yeah, for sure. I think so. And I mean, I think that's kind of the role that, Luka played almost in that UVA game, right? So I think for me, the lineup that makes, and again, just my opinion, that makes a lot more sense is, having somebody like Derek on the ball and then playing Luka or Kyan off the ball, in that 2, or maybe even for Luka, I guess the 3. I think that makes a lot more sense. I was never personally really a fan of playing Luka and Kyan together. But that's just me, because I just think both are better, much better off the ball, catch and shoots. And again, that's just me. I think Derek and, Coach Davis is not really going to come out and, say, this is our guy, this is the point guard, we're moving on with him. I mean, I asked him on the ACC coaches call, like, hey, are you guys kind of settled with, Derek is the point, and he's not going to give you that. But I mean, I think it's his role to lose. Just again, pulling up the stats here, game high plus 22, 11 points, 7 assists, 4 rebounds, just 1 turnover at John Paul Jones Arena. I was talking with CL Brown, who's the columnist now, at the Louisville Courier-Journal, former UNC beat writer for the News and Observer. We were both actually working the Duke-Louisville game on Monday, and we were kind of talking about it with, some of these like pitch ahead passes that you've seen from Dixon almost Kendall Marshall-esque. And again, like I know that's a name drop and not saying like, I hate to put that on someone. But just his ability to push the tempo with some of those like pitch ahead passes, pinpoint stuff in transition, just made for really, really pretty basketball. I think he's the guy. I think he's ready. This is somebody that's, Kobe White has actually kind of taken under his wing. They built a little bit of a relationship since the off season. I know that they still are in contact, or he texts with Kobe's brother. And I love his game. I love his mentality, and he seems super, super ready for the moment. And again, just the ability for him to kind of get on his teammates and be a leader in that sense too. I've been very, very impressed. So, I mean, by all intents and purposes, I think Dixon is your guy, is your point guard. I think you're still going to see, other folks taking the ball up in certain instances, Seth, Caleb, Luka. That's something that Coach Davis has talked about. But I think as much as possible, taking the ball and kind of some of the responsibility really out of Luka and Kyan's hands, and just telling them, look, what I need you to do, come in stretches, hit 2 or 3 threes, and that's your role. That's what I need. Like, let's just lower kind of maybe the laundry list of things there. I think that'll really free those guys up. And I think you saw it with Luka and his ability to come in. I think had some really, really timely and important shots in that Virginia game that maybe went a little bit unnoticed. But you think about, the threes, I think it was him and Derek that they hit to then cut the deficit to single digits going into halftime. That was huge. But I think some of the we've had a lot of backcourt questions, collectively as fans, as folks on the beat. I think we're starting to see some of those settle a little bit. Derek seems settled. And then I think it's a matter of some of these other guards that you can kind of throw into the lineup. Who has the hot hand? Is it Luka? Is it Kyan? Is it Jonathan Powell? And you have a lot of options there, just to, who's hitting shots. We'll keep them in. If not, go to someone else. So I think that's where some of that depth in the guard room will be helpful.
2 more for you now. I'll let you go. I've kept you a little bit longer than that.
Yeah, no, it's my fault. I talk a lot. So
it's great though. It's great insight. So I'm really enjoying the conversation we're having. I'll go back to the summer. Hubert Davis held his annual off-season press conference really before the preseason got underway. And he acknowledged the pressure that comes with the job. And because from a fan perspective, this felt like make or break, despite we never get told by Carolina if a coach is on the hot seat, especially Carolina basketball with the way that, that the program kind of runs itself. But from the outside looking in, it felt like he has to win, and he has to do some big things to secure that he's the guy moving forward. And so that was really the first time since he got hired that he really addressed that going into the year. When you go back to the West Coast trip, there was a lot of negativity. There was a lot of volatile conversations about him. And it was a guy like Caleb Wilson, some other players coming to his defense saying, hey, when we play like crap, it's our fault, not his. My question to you is this. Do you think Hubert is aware of the noise that is around him? Because we know that he's always talking about, no sideshow distractions. He has that Proverbs verse that he'll give his players sometime. But this is Carolina basketball. There's an inherent pressure that comes with the job. And I think he knows that the roller coaster is not what even he would have expected of himself as Carolina's head coach. So do you think he's aware of some of the negativity that maybe exists within the fan base of the program that he coaches?
That's a tough one. I'm not sure. I think really he is not online.
Yeah.
Like, honestly. There's been some things that we've asked him just offhand about, oh, like, hey, did you see this clip of like Tom Izzo's, comments on this, or hey, did you see X or what? Like, I remember one time, I think it was after the Kansas game. There's a football game the next day, and I ran into him. He has like his basketball box within. It's kind of like the same level as the press box. Ran into him. We're chatting. I said something about, oh my gosh, I need to show you. Have you seen the shirt that Caleb Wilson's dad was wearing? I had like sent out a photo on Twitter, and a bunch of people like reposted and picked it up, and he had made like a B2A shirt. And he was like, no, what are you talking about? I showed him. He had a great laugh. Yeah, so I really don't think he's online, but I mean, he's not dumb by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, he understands the standards of UNC basketball because he was a player. He was on staff for all those years. He's the head coach now. This is a Carolina family guy through and through. So I don't think he needs to see anything on Twitter, on the message boards, to understand when they're not playing up to his expectations or, the brand's expectations. So I think both can be true in the sense that I don't think he pays attention to it, but he understands the expectations and the standards because he has them himself. That said, I remember, I think it was maybe after, I forget if it was ECU or East Tennessee State, but whatever the game was where his son Elijah hit that 3 at the end. We got to talk to his son after the game for an extended period of time. That was really interesting because he brought up to us, we were just asking about like, how much did it mean for you to be named a captain? He said, I think with my dad, and everyone knows this is a big year for him. There's pressure on him. I'm ad-libbing here. I'm paraphrasing. So for him he brought it up himself in the sense of like, for him to name me a captain this year, that meant a lot. So, the players know, they see it. His son, it sounds like, certainly sees it. So, I think both can be true, but I think he's also somebody that is proud of, his record and what he's been able to do, in this era, in the sense of, the Sweet 16 run, going to the national title game, all the highlights. Certainly there have been some lows, but he's proud of those accomplishments too. And also coming in what's has been a way more turbulent time for college basketball athletics as a whole, far more than he would have expected, when he took the job, with NIL and transfer portal, all these house settlement, all these things coming up. He's been able to adapt. Definitely slower than some others, definitely slower than, some folks down the street. And, he's been called out to a certain extent for that, and, why it takes so long to get a general manager and some of those things. But I think is coming around. And so, yeah, I guess my answer to that, is like yes and no, if that makes sense.
All right. Last thing, and we'll get out of here. I asked you to start off to assess Carolina where they're at. Now I'll ask you, what do you think the ultimate ceiling is? Because at 12-1, and we're drawing comparisons to 08-09, that of course was a national championship season. There's been a little bit of dip with some of the struggles they've endured here in ACC play, but they're a top 20 team. They're going to be, I think, probably no worse, a top 6 seed. Come Selection Sunday, you've got one of the 3 best freshmen, in my opinion, in the country playing in your front court. I don't think they can win an ACC regular season title. I think 3 games is too much to make up against Duke unless you outright sweep them, and I think that's a tough bill to ask. So what do you think the ultimate ceiling is for this group? Can they get to a second weekend? And could they maybe, with the right draw, could they maybe find themselves playing in the Final Four?
I would say, beginning of the season, I would have said maybe like a sneaky Elite 8 team. I think some of the struggles in ACC play, and when they face a hot shooting team, especially from deep, have maybe shifted that. So I would say ceiling, ceiling Sweet 16, I think. And honestly, if I think they're gonna have to make that, and that's kind of the expectation, I think, of this group, just based on kind of looking at Coach Davis's record, and particularly the investment they've put into this year's roster. I'd say that's the expectation. I think it's I would say a ceiling that they're certainly capable of hitting if they can continue to improve on the defensive ends, if you can get some, reliable production from the supporting cast around the front courts. I think, they have the pieces, but it's just about putting it together, making sure that they continue to tweak and improve, and are playing their best basketball in March when it matters.
I think that's a fair assessment. I think if you get to the Sweet 16, from there, it's always a crapshoot from there on the rest of the tournament. And more importantly, we're talking about Hubert Davis and his job security. Three Sweet 16s in 5 years with the national title run, probably good enough to secure his job for the foreseeable future, which is something that really passionate about him doing, because there's really no one else in the family that's ready for the job. So, and this was great. Shelby, I want to thank you. I've had a lot of fun. Next time I'm on pressure, we'll have to meet formally, because I'm at home games. I'm at the very top. Kirshner gives me the very last seat on pressure row, wherever game that I'm at. But I enjoy your work. I think you're great. And it was good getting to chat Carolina basketball with you here today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Sorry we went a little long, but obviously it's a topic we're both passionate about, so I can be a little long-winded.
Hey, there's nothing to apologize. I had a lot of fun and can't wait to do it again. So that's going to wrap it up for this edition of the podcast, guys. I want to thank Shelby once again for joining us here on the Four Corners podcast. In the meantime, we encourage you guys to visit the website. That's HeelToughBlog.com. Full coverage of Carolina basketball. Tar Heel football can be found on the website. We'll have an article about Carolina's NCAA tournament projections, as we're 7 weeks away from Selection Sunday going up. And then we'll be getting you ready for the game this weekend at Georgia Tech. Anthony has you covered all things Carolina football. We got the ACC schedule dropped earlier this week. There's an article up about that. Any news and notes from the transfer portal, we'll have you covered as well. As for the podcast, you guys know where to find us. Every major podcasting platform, just search the Four Corners Podcasting will pop up. There, we encourage you guys to rate, review, and subscribe. That way you don't miss any audio editions of the show. If you're a video consumer, best way to keep up with us, like and follow the Facebook page at Heel Tough Blog. Subscribe to the YouTube channel at Heel Tough Blog, or follow me on Twitter at HTB_Josh. The second we go live, you'll be notified. You can jump in and be a part of the conversation. With that, guys, it is going to wrap up this edition of the show. I want to thank Shelby once again for joining me. We want to thank you guys for both watching and listening. And as always, go Tar Heels.